Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a story you probably think you know inside and out, Adam and Eve. But according to our source text, Eve and Adam, this isn't just an old story. It's actually presented as a kind of blueprint, for creation, for choice, and for the consequences that shape our entire world even today.
So, what if the first story is everyone's story? This question really gets to the core of what we're talking about today. The source we're looking at says, hey, this isn't just some dusty piece of ancient history. It's more like a mirror for the human condition itself, a way to understand our potential, our choices, and what the text calls our fundamental need for rescue.
Okay, so to really get a handle on what the fall even means, we've got to start with what was lost, right? We have to look at God's original design. The story kicks off in the Garden of Eden, and it paints this picture of absolute perfection, so we can really feel the weight of what happens next. Now, here's the foundational idea right here. This whole concept of being made in God's image and likeness. It's not about, our physical appearance. The source really emphasizes that this is about us being created to reflect God's own nature. Things like our ability to create, to reason, to form relationships, and especially our sense of right and wrong, our moral awareness.
And the way they were created is just packed with symbolism. So you have Adam, formed from the dust, which really ties humanity to the earth, to the physical world. But then there's Eve, formed from his side. And this is so crucial. Our source points out this isn't about one being better than the other, not a hierarchy. It's all about partnership. It's setting up this idea of unity and depending on each other, right from the get-go.
So this was the original setup. This was paradise, a world of total harmony, not just with each other, but with God. The text describes a life that's, completely free from the shame, the fear, the conflict that we all know so well today. It was just this open, innocent connection. But here's the thing. This whole perfect reality, this paradise, it all hung by a single thread. One rule, one prohibition, and everything was about to change because of one choice.
And let's be clear, this wasn't really about some magic fruit. According to the text, this was the one boundary that actually gave their freedom real meaning. It became the central point of their relationship with God, and it all boiled down to one single question. Were they going to trust His wisdom, or were they going to try to define good and evil on their own terms?
So the source text lays out the serpent's temptation like a strategy, a really clear three-step attack. First, question what God actually said. Did God really say? Second, go after God's motives. He's holding out on you. And third, just flat out deny the consequences. You won't die. It's really presented as this masterclass in manipulation, totally designed to just tear down trust.
So, tempted by how the fruit looked and by that promise of being like God, they ate. And that one simple act of disobedience, that single choice to trust their own judgment over their creators, that's presented as the exact moment sin walked onto the stage of the human story.
And the fallout was immediate, but it wasn't physical death. Not right away. It was something different, a spiritual death. Their eyes were opened, just like the serpent said, but what they saw was their own vulnerability. Their innocence was gone, just shattered, and in its place, shame, fear, and a broken relationship with God.
And that one choice, it wasn't just about them. It was like a stone tossed into a perfectly still pond. It sent these massive ripples out, changing everything. It didn't just alter the human experience. According to the text, it affected the entire state of creation.
So the consequences completely fractured that harmony we talked about. The serpent is cursed. For Eve, the text says the joy of having children is now mixed with pain, and her relationships will be filled with tension. And for Adam, the very ground he was meant to cultivate is now cursed. Work becomes a painful struggle, a toil, and it all leads, eventually, to physical death, returning to the very dust he was made from.
And being thrown out of Eden. That's the ultimate physical symbol of their new spiritual reality. It's a picture of the deep, massive gap that sin just ripped open between humanity and God. A separation from being in His presence.
But right here, in this moment of what seems like total disaster, the story doesn't just end. The source shows us that even in the middle of all this judgment, the narrative takes a sharp turn. It introduces this surprising glimmer of hope.
And this line right here, spoken to the serpent, is absolutely crucial. For thousands of years, this has been seen as the very first hint of the gospel, the first promise of a rescuer, a descendant of Eve who would one day go head-to-head with the serpent and deal a final crushing blow.
So you see, even in the middle of judgment, grace shows up. God himself makes clothes for them, an act that does two things. It covers their immediate physical shame, but in this interpretation, it also points forward. It foreshadows that a sacrifice will be needed to truly cover sin. The promise of rescue is literally woven into the fabric of the consequences.
Okay, so now we get to what you might call the theological payoff. This is where the whole story of Adam is used later on in the Bible as a lens, a framework for understanding the work and the meaning of Jesus Christ.
The New Testament draws this really powerful parallel. Think about it. Where the first Adam brought disobedience, sin, and death into the world, the second Adam, Jesus, is presented as bringing the exact opposite. He brings perfect obedience. His life is framed as the antidote, the thing that reverses the curse, offering righteousness, forgiveness, and new life instead.
And this verse really just sums it all up perfectly. For as in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive. It's that simple. Adam is seen as the doorway through which sin and death entered the human story. And Christ, in this framework, is the new doorway, the one that leads to righteousness and life.
And that's our explainer for today, which leaves us with this final, really powerful thought. The source presents a story where the fall of humanity and the promise of its rescue happen in the same breath, in the same chapter. So what does it mean for a problem to be introduced at the exact same time as its solution? It seems the story doesn't want to leave us in despair, but instead it frames the problem and the promise as two sides of the same coin, right from the very beginning.